Hi, I'm Patrick Sullivan. This is a recurring insight. And for this episode, I'm going to be talking about Death's Shadow. There's a lot of cool stuff going on with Death's Shadow. It's evocative, there's some novel gameplay and synergies, and it stands out. I think there's a lot of value in having a one in every 100 game piece that tells a different story just to stimulate the imagination. But I don't think it's an ideal thing necessarily to make powerful for construction.
I think there's a lot to like about Death's Shadow. I don't think it's a design that you're supposed to do a ton of, and even the one copy at the rate that it is not all upside, but as part of the range, I think it's phenomenal. First of all, it stands out. A 1-mana 13/13 just catches your eye, and the story is really good too. It doesn't feel like a card that's overly developed. It feels like the mechanics fall out of a story about the card, which is a really interesting way and a really desirable way to execute a design that's a little bit on the weird side. I've also talked about how much I like 1-mana spells that aren't about just blowing someone out on the first turn, but is rather about seizing tempo at some critical point. And Death's Shadow is a great example of that. It's a little heavy-handed as far as that goes. You know, typically I point to Scred as an example of the way that I like the execution because it is useful on turn one, but scales up in power as the game goes. Death's Shadow is typically not useful on the first turn of the game, but it is more about seizing tempo later on and catching up than it is about blowing someone out of the doors in the first couple turns of the game. Now, just because the design is cool doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing to point towards constructed level play. And Death's Shadow, I think, grades out a lot sketchier when you look at it through that lens. Now, it's not really Death's Shadow's fault. Without the Ravnica duels and the fetch lands, the card's, I think, not even close to considerable for tier 1, barring really weird stuff going on. But those cards do exist, so you had to talk about them as part of the conversation. There is an extent to which your opponent is always going to make you play around stuff or engage in problems in a non-intuitive way. I think once you're talking about someone plays a creature on turn 1 and they don't know if they're supposed to attack with it on turn 2, you've entered a level of non-intuitive play that is sketchy. And that is amplified by the fact that these exchanges are ambiguous. It would be one thing if Death's Shadow at a certain health total transformed into whatever, and then you had this really specific demarcation of what life total to avoid getting your opponent to. Since all of it is ambient, it's just an extra +1/+1 or +2/+2, but all of that matters because you play Death's Shadow alongside Double Strike and trample effects like Timorous Bowel's Rage. The incentives that are put on the opponent are often really non-intuitive and also not transparent, hard to noodle through. So as far as a ubiquitous experience in Tier 1 constructed, it's not something that I like. But the principles here are really sound. It's a 1-drop that is about catching you up later rather than running someone down on the first few turns of the game. The story is phenomenal. The gameplay incentives are stimulating. There's a lot of weird combos that you can synergize with the card. And as part of the range, like I said, not something you're supposed to do all the time, not supposed to be the entirety of the Tier 1 experience. But as part of the range, I think Death's Shadow is a pretty sweet design, even with my misgivings about it being a strong constructed card.
Again, that was Death's Shadow, and this is a recurring insight. Make sure that you're subscribed to the Star City Games YouTube page so you can get notified when new content is uploaded to the page, and keep those requests coming as well. I want to do something a little bit old school for next week. So let's say Legends and before. Anything from Legends, Antiquities, Arabian Nights, or the original set that you would like to see covered, put the request up in the comments and hopefully I'll get to it next week.